The love I had for my favorite superstar led me to ruin. I am the only child of my parents. My father died in a car accident when I was 8, and my mother raised me alone amidst many difficulties. After my father's death, my paternal family pressured my mother to either marry my uncle or they would take my custody. My mother fought hard, and after much persuasion, they finally agreed to let her have my custody. Thankfully, we had a house and received my father's pension, but it wasn't enough to cover all our needs. So, my mother did sewing work to help with expenses. When I was 13, I fell in love with a cinema superstar. You might laugh, but I loved him so much that I would have given my life just to see him up close. This love blinded me, and I dedicated my entire life to it. Initially, my mother didn't take it seriously, thinking it was just a phase due to puberty and that it would pass. My room was filled with posters of that actor, hoping one day I would get to meet him. I grew up and entered university, but my mother became worried and always tried to dissuade me from this love. I was madly in love with George, a young and beautiful cinema superstar, and worshipped him to the point of death. To my mother and, of course, all my friends and relatives, this was a ridiculous and laughable love. But I couldn't help it. Until one day, after enduring back-to-back grueling classes, I returned home exhausted. But the scene I encountered crushed my heart. In utter disbelief, I saw my mother had torn down one of George's posters I had hung on the living room wall. My blood boiled. I was about to speak up when my mother burst out, saying she was fed up with me, Charlotte. She lamented, "What am I to do with you, and where can I find refuge? You're educated, pursuing higher studies, and yet you roam the streets like a mad person, hopping from one magazine office to another, just to find that damn number. I toil like a dog from dawn to dusk so you can study comfortably without any shortcomings, but you don't understand this. You were only 8 when your father died. I stayed single to raise you and to avoid having a stepfather over your head. I became both your father and mother. I've endured so much hardship and misery, but this is how you repay me. You're not even thinking about yourself and your future, throwing your life away for someone who doesn't even know you exist. You've rejected several good suitors for frivolous reasons, waiting for him, who's oblivious to God, the young and ill-fated, to come on a white horse to court you." I was so frustrated. I threw my bag into a corner and pleaded, "Please, don't start again. Let me settle in before you attack. And you know very well how much I love him and spend my days and nights dreaming of reaching him. You know I've been in love with George for years and under no circumstances will I lose hope. I will keep trying until I finally find his number. Be assured, when he hears my words and knows I've worshipped him for all these years, he will definitely marry me. So, stop with your lectures, especially when you know they're futile. Please, don't wreck your nerves or mine." Then, I headed to my room for some rest, but as soon as I opened my door, the sight of the bare walls in my room nearly gave me a stroke. My mother had stripped all of George's posters from the walls. I couldn't tolerate this insult. Screaming, I asked, "What right did you have to do this? How could you dare tear down the pictures of my love? With your actions, you've torn my heart apart. What kind of mother are you?" My mother, more furious than I, stood in front of me and said, "I am going to set you straight, Charlotte. You need to get over that damn delusion. I won't let you ruin your future over a foolish dream. One of my colleagues is coming to propose for his son in a few days. I might have to force you into the marriage, but I won't let you deceive yourself any longer." My body was shaking with rage. My mother was insulting my sacred love. I clenched my fist and yelled, "You know better than anyone how much I love George. I'm willing to die for him. You know I watch every movie he's in repeatedly until I memorize all his dialogues. You're aware that my life hinges on his breath, and yet you dare speak about him this way? Do you think you can force me into marriage? Fine, if that's what you think, I might as well kill myself tonight and relieve you of this burden. Is that what you want?" This argument was a recurring theme between my mother and me. I was hopelessly in love with George, desperately seeking his phone number or address, willing to go through fire and water for it. There wasn't a magazine office left where I hadn't pleaded and cried to the arts editors, begging them to give me George's number. Each time, I received the same response: "We can't give out the numbers of celebrities." My days and nights were filled with George. My room's walls and our house were adorned with his large posters, and his beautiful face was the background on my mobile phone. All my friends, family, and acquaintances knew of my platonic love. I knew they all talked behind my back, mocking me. When my mother heard these talks, she would get angry and say, "With this ridiculous love of yours, you've made both yourself and me a laughingstock to everyone. They all laugh at you, saying Charlotte must be crazy to fall in love with a movie superstar. Come to your senses, girl." But I didn't care and would ask anyone I met, "Please, if you can, get me George's number. If he hears that I've lived and breathed for years longing for him, he will surely come for me and fall in love. We would be so happy together." Now, when I think back to those days, I only sigh. If I had known that this love would destroy me, I would never have insisted so much. My mother and I would fight over George every day. She would try to dissuade me with advice, pleading, crying, sometimes threatening and even beating me to steer me away from this hollow love. That evening, when I returned from university and saw that my mother had torn George's posters, a fierce argument erupted between us. I knew that in such situations, the best way to escape my mother's scolding and shouting was to threaten suicide, so I resorted to my usual tactic and said, "Tomorrow morning, you'll carry my corpse out of this house and be rid of me forever." My mother, having no one else in the world but me, changed her stance upon hearing this threat. Trying to cover her anger with a forced smile, she said, "My dear daughter, for God's sake, don't do this. Doesn't your heart ache for me? At least pity your youth? How many times have you overdosed on pills for George and ended up in the hospital? How many times have the doctors brutally inserted that filthy tube down your throat for a stomach wash? All this suffering and crying for Mr. George's phone number? You approached everyone and got mocked and laughed at. But does he even know about the torment you are enduring? You are my daughter, my flesh and blood, and it kills me to see you torment yourself like this. You've worked hard and gone to university, being one of the most talented students there. You have so many suitors, doctors, and engineers. Are you going to sacrifice all that for a fictitious love? Please, Charlotte, don't do this to yourself." Ignoring my mother's tears, I went to my room. Every day when I returned home, I used to greet George's photo in my room, but now my heartless mother had torn up all of George's posters. I locked my room, not in the mood for my mother's cries and lectures. She had broken my heart. I sat on the floor, clutching the torn posters, and cried my heart out. I wept and wailed like someone who had lost a loved one, not knowing when sleep overtook me. When I woke up, it was past 10 in the morning. I had missed my first class. I quickly dressed and left my room. My mother had left some money and a note on the table, asking me to forgive her for last night's outburst. That day, after university, I went to the store and bought new pictures of George. Once again, my room's walls were filled with colorful posters. My mother no longer nagged me like before, and I continued to burn in my passionate love for George. There wasn't a magazine or newspaper office left that I hadn't visited for the 100th time. Every time I went to an office, the public relations officer would frown upon seeing me and say, "How idle are you, girl? Aren't you tired of all this coming and going? Be sure, even if you come here 1,000 times, they won't give you the number of your favorite actor." I heard these mockeries, saw the ridicule, but I didn't lose hope. No suitor was allowed to step into our house. George was the love of my life, and I was meant to marry only him. Days passed, and I graduated with my bachelor's degree, still in pursuit of George. Every night and day, I prayed to God to bring me to George, and finally, my prayers were answered. It was the goodbye party of one of my university friends. My friend was planning to move to Australia and had organized a big farewell party. It was at that party that I managed to get George's mobile number through one of the guests. I was over the moon with joy. The next night, I called that number, and as soon as I heard hello from the other side, my heart soared. Without stuttering, I poured out everything I had gone through over the years to George. He, who had been silent throughout my hour-long speech, said after hearing me out, "If you agree, let's meet up. Come to the cafe I'll tell you about tomorrow." Could this be happening? I couldn't stay calm for even a moment. I stood in front of the mirror, scrutinizing my face, rehearsing the words I had prepared to say to George so that nothing would be left unsaid. My mother, however, sat in a corner, watching me anxiously. I joyfully told her, "See, I finally found my way to him, didn't I? Do you remember how much you criticized me, saying others mocked and laughed at me? Now, when the famous movie superstar Mr. George marries me and becomes your son-in-law, others will look at me with envy, and it will be my turn to laugh at them." That night, I paced up and down the house, talking to myself and excited. When morning came, I quickly dressed in my best clothes, got ready, and headed to the cafe where we were supposed to meet. After waiting for about half an hour, a man, almost 40 years old, came and sat opposite me, smiling and asking, "Mrs. Charlotte?" I was taken aback. He looked nothing like George. I thought to myself that George must have been unable to come and had sent one of his friends to inform me. I immediately asked, "You?" The man, staring at me with a persistent smile, said, "Lucky George to have such a beautiful girl in love with him." I didn't like the tone of his voice. I frowned and asked firmly, "Who are you, sir?" The man ran his hand through his hair and said, "Actually, the person you spoke to last night was me. I bought this number from George about a month ago, and by the way, George is a friend of mine." I felt utterly devastated. A lump formed in my throat, and I wanted to burst into tears. The man, noticing my state, handed me a box of tissues and said, "There's no reason to be sad and cry because I can help you and give you George's actual number. From what you said last night, I could tell you're genuinely in love with George. Well, I see George a few times a week and can put in a good word for you. You know George is a very busy man." Hope returned to my heart. This man was willing to help me reach George. Amidst tears, I smiled and said, "Please, help me. I am in love with George and willing to do anything to reach him. I can't live without him." The man looked around, then leaned in closer and whispered, "I'm ready to help you, but there's a condition." He said, "You have to sleep with me once." Hearing the vile condition that man set for giving me George's mobile number, I was distressed. Without saying a word, I got up from my seat and left the cafe in disappointment. My state of mind was shattered after that encounter. There was no stone left unturned in my quest to find George's number or address, yet I couldn't get him out of my head. I had lived for years with his photos and films. How could I just let go of him now? For several days, I wrestled with myself, and then, without letting my mother suspect anything, I called Arthur and went to his house. I couldn't believe it myself, but my blind love for George made me agree to sleep with Arthur. Arthur kept his promise and gave me the number. When I called George, my heart was in my throat until he said hello, and then my heart sank. In fear of being cut off, I quickly recounted the entire story to him. But he apologized and said he couldn't meet me, and my intense love and devotion meant nothing to him. He even said many people are in love with him like me, and that's not a reason to bother him. Hearing this and realizing that I had become Arthur's partner and lost everything for George, I wanted to die. Right there, I started crying loudly, broke everything within my reach, and tore up all his posters. Charlotte, the main character of our story, has gone through a challenging journey. Losing her father in childhood, her mother struggled to raise her, and her devastating love for a superstar all took a toll. Do you think Charlotte could have avoided this fate? Were her decisions throughout the story understandable? And finally, what lessons can we learn from this story? I look forward to your thoughts. If you have any advice or experience that you think could help Charlotte, please share it with us. And if you liked it, don't forget to hit like, please. My mother entered the room and saw me surrounded by torn posters, in a disheveled state. She paled, rushed towards me, and anxiously asked, "What happened? Charlotte, what's this mess? Answer me, you're giving me a heart attack. Why did you tear up your posters?" Your life depended on them. Why are your eyes bloodshot? I just stared at her, speechless. What could I say? That I disgraced her because of my false love? Or that I was no longer the same Charlotte? My mother saw I was in shock and slapped me, bringing me back to reality. I cried from the depths of my soul. My crying was so intense, it was as if I had lost a loved one. I said, "Mom, you were right. I shouldn't have believed in this love. Forgive me. I've ruined my life." My mother hugged me and said, "Oh, my child, it's okay. I said you would come to your senses one day. Thank God you've listened to me. Now, let me throw these fake posters away while you go wash your face. Get up, my dear." Hearing these words from my mother made me feel ashamed. Guilt and remorse wouldn't leave me. I had betrayed my mother's trust. About a month passed since that incident. I had become a nervous and depressed girl who didn't respond to any of my friends. My mother, trying not to pressure me, didn't say much. She was happy and worried at the same time until one day she said, "Charlotte dear, do you remember my friend Catherine? The one whose daughter's wedding we attended a few months ago? Today, she told me her son Alfred has seen you and is very interested in you. He said he's fallen head over heels in love with you and hasn't been at peace since that night. Let them come over, dear. You might like him. He's a good and handsome young man. He's a lawyer, has his own office, and is financially stable." My mother said all this while I silently watched her. She didn't know her daughter had ruined her life and future because of a superstar's love. Everything was so meaningless to me, and I had lost all motivation that nothing mattered anymore. So I told my mother, "Okay, I have no objections. Tell them to come." My mother's eyes sparkled with joy. She kissed my face and said, "I'll tell them to come this weekend. May you be happy and blessed, my daughter." In my heart, I thought, happy? I've lost everything. If I agreed, it was only to get you off my back, Mom. The day of the proposal arrived. Despite my mother's efforts, I had no desire to dress up, so I just wore a simple outfit and waited for Alfred and his family to arrive. Aunt Catherine and her husband had another daughter, older than Alfred, who was married and had a child. When they arrived, Aunt Catherine hugged me warmly and said, "I knew you'd eventually become my daughter-in-law, my dear. I hope you and Alfred come to an agreement and make us and your mother very happy with this marriage." But from Alfred, I didn't expect such a level of understanding and maturity. He really was everything one could ask for. When we sat down to talk, I was waiting for an excuse from him to tell my mother and call it off. The fear that Alfred might find out I had been assaulted and the disgrace it would bring to me and especially to my mother in front of her best friend was torturing me. But Alfred didn't give me any reason to complain. Whatever I said, he agreed and expressed his love for me, willing to do anything to make this love mutual. Yes, I was in a quagmire where the more I struggled, the deeper I sank. When our conversation ended, Alfred said, "Well, Miss Charlotte, if you agree, let's tell our families to have a short engagement period so we can get to know each other's likes and dislikes. I also want you to develop the same affection for me that I have for you. What do you think?" I was sweating coldly and couldn't bring myself to say no, as I couldn't find any fault with him. If I objected without reason, I would have been playing with both my mother's and Alfred's emotions. So, I agreed, and Alfred and I got engaged in a small family ceremony. 5 months passed since our engagement. Days went by, and I began to see more of Alfred's goodness and his true character. The day I told my mother to invite them for the proposal, I never thought my path would lead this far. Deciding to discuss this with my close university friend Emily, I felt like I was going insane. The burden I was carrying was crushing me, so after a long time, I called Emily and arranged to meet her. We met at a cafe. Emily said, "Charlotte, if only you knew how many times I've tried to contact you in these past few months. Where were you? Why couldn't I find you?" I replied, "I know I've been terrible, forgive me. But I really need your help now." Hearing my worried tone, Emily said, "What's wrong? I'll help you in any way I can." I told her everything from the beginning. When I got to the part about my encounter with Arthur, I broke down in tears. Emily wiped my tears away and said, "What happened to you, Charlotte? Why did you do this to yourself?" I admitted my mistake and regret, saying I wanted her advice on what to do. She suggested, "My cousin is a gynecologist. I can talk to her and arrange for you to see her. Don't lose Alfred." I said I needed to think and would let her know. That night, I thought until morning, but the more I thought, the more I realized it wasn't fair to Alfred to keep this from him. So, I decided to find a way to bring up the subject with Alfred to see how he would react if he knew the truth. 2 days later, when Alfred and I went out, I said, "Alfred, can I ask you something? Will you be honest with me?" He replied, "Ask, my dear. When have I ever lied to you?" I asked, "What would you do if you found out one day that I hid something important from you?" He thought for a moment and said, "Charlotte, I believe honesty is the foundation of life. I want us to be upfront about things that concern each other. I can tolerate everything except lies and deceit. So, what made you ask this?" I smiled and said, "I want to tell you about something I caused. It's up to you whether you want to stay with me after hearing the truth or separate. But promise me that what I tell you stays between us." Seeing the seriousness, Alfred promised, "I promise it'll stay between us." "What's wrong? You're worrying me." I took a deep breath and said, "I was assaulted." Alfred was shocked and stared at me for a few minutes before asking, "Are you testing me? This isn't a funny joke." Tears welled up in my eyes as I began recounting the whole story. As I spoke, Alfred's face turned redder and his expression became angrier. I had prepared myself for anything, knowing there was a high chance Alfred might leave me. But I couldn't bear the stress of keeping this secret from him for a lifetime. When I finished speaking, Alfred was silent and deep in thought for several minutes. Then he said angrily, "If it had been with someone you loved, it wouldn't have hurt me as much as finding out you slept with some unknown man just to get a celebrity's number. Charlotte, I can't digest this. I'm really sorry. You should have told me before we got engaged. Why bring it up now when we were getting close to our wedding? You've destroyed me." His veins were bulging on his neck and forehead, his eyes red and teary. I was so devastated that anyone who saw me would feel pity. I swallowed hard and said, "You deserve the best, and I don't deserve you. Forgive me for not telling you sooner." Then, without another word, I left Alfred and ran towards the street. I wandered the streets for hours, crying, cursing myself and my childish love. The thought even crossed my mind to throw myself in front of a car and end this miserable life. But the image of my mother kept me from doing it, knowing she couldn't survive without me. I don't know what time it was, only that my legs were shaky from hours of non-stop walking. The streets were quieter, and I was shocked to see it was 11 o'clock at night. I had been on the streets since 5 in the evening. I quickly hailed a taxi and returned home. As soon as I opened the door, I was confronted with my mother's tear-streaked face. I was scared. I went to her, took her hands, and asked, "What happened, Mom?" While wiping her tears, she said, "Catherine called. She said Alfred came home and told his parents we don't have an understanding and that it's best we separate. Then he packed his suitcase and left without saying anything else." "What happened, Mother? Didn't you two love each other?" I knew Alfred was too much of a man to say anything. I told my mother, "Well, we got engaged to get to know each other, right? Unfortunately, we just didn't have enough in common and decided to part ways amicably." As I said these words, I avoided looking into my mother's eyes. Although she seemed unconvinced, she said, "You know what's best for you, but I wish you hadn't rushed into things." I replied, "It's been 5 or 6 months, Mother, where was the rush?" My mother hugged me and said, "Don't worry, my dear. It must have been fate, but it's strange, you two seemed so perfect for each other. Maybe there's another reason." My mother was suspicious, but I tried my best to convince her, so she wouldn't probe further into the matter with Aunt Catherine or put Alfred and me in a difficult position. 4 months passed since my breakup with Alfred. Those 4 months were harder than the fake love period. Alfred's kindness had made me dependent, and during these months, I felt like someone undergoing withdrawal. I even secretly went to his office a few times and saw him from a distance. My heart ached for him. He had lost weight, visibly worn down. I didn't deserve Alfred's love and shouldn't play with his feelings anymore. I decided to get my life back on track because I had become a depressed person, causing more pain to my mother. So, I talked to her and decided to look for a job. I had studied accounting, and after much searching, I managed to get employed as an assistant accountant in a private company. Thankfully, the company was quiet, and all the employees were focused on their work. Days flew by quickly, and I found solace in my memories with Alfred until one day, an unknown number called me. When I answered, a familiar voice said, "Miss Charlotte?" I responded, "Yes, who's this?" The voice said, "Hello, it's Arthur." I immediately hung up the phone. But he called again. I was getting agitated. Why was he calling me? He called several times, but I didn't answer. Then, I heard my phone beep with a new message. He had messaged me on WhatsApp, writing that it would be in my best interest to reply, or else he had some unpleasant news for me. I was about to block him when I saw he had sent a picture. With trembling hands, I opened it. Seeing the photo of myself and Arthur in his house, everything went black before my eyes, and I lost consciousness. I slowly came to with vague sounds around me and someone shaking me. I opened my eyes to see my colleague, who was anxiously calling my name and stirring sugar water. I held my head, feeling an excruciating pain. My colleague said, "Calm down, you passed out and hit your head on the desk, and it's swollen." What happened all of a sudden? The memory of that cursed photo terrified me. I jumped up, frantically searching for my phone, grabbed my bag, and staggered out of the office, ignoring my colleagues' calls of "Charlotte, Charlotte." I ran through the streets, sobbing uncontrollably. God, why won't this terrible incident leave me alone? I didn't know what to do. I looked at my phone, 20 missed calls from Arthur and a message. I opened the message, which read, "Don't be foolish. Now you understand your reputation is in my hands. Waiting for your call." Oh God, what should I do? I was so distraught that I suddenly vomited into the street gutter. My body was shaking uncontrollably, and I had no strength to stand up, fixated on Arthur's message, when a woman approached, offered me chocolate, and helped me to stand. The lady asked if I wanted her to call an ambulance. I said no, thank you, and continued on my way. When I got home, my mother wasn't there. I paced around my room, hitting my head, trying to think, but my brain wasn't functioning. Then, my phone rang again. Shaking, I picked it up, and upon seeing Arthur's cursed number, I fell to the ground and answered. Before Arthur could say anything, I yelled, "What do you want from me, you monster? Leave me alone, or I will file a complaint against you." Arthur laughed and said, "Everyone says that, but I'm sure you won't do anything. So listen carefully and don't try any wildness, or I'll break you. Come to my house this weekend. If you don't, you know what I'll do, you won't be able to show your face to friends and acquaintances." At first, I cursed and screamed, but seeing it was useless, I resorted to pleading. I begged him to leave me alone, asking if he didn't have enough girls to bother. "Leave me alone, you've ruined my life, that's enough." He replied, "There are plenty of girls, but not many stupid and naive ones like you. Now that I've found one, why shouldn't I make the most of it? If I haven't called you till now, it was because I was busy and abroad, but you were always on my mind. I won't repeat myself. I'm waiting for you, lady." I screamed, "Damn the day I stepped into your house, damn George for having scavenger friends like you. But know this, not even my corpse will come to your house. Do whatever you want." I didn't let him respond and hung up. Crying was of no use, I had to think of something substantial. It was clear Arthur wouldn't let me be. On one hand, my reputation was at stake, on the other, I couldn't repeat the stupidity of being assaulted again. I blocked Arthur's number everywhere and decided to seek help from someone. I thought long and hard about the consequences and realized I couldn't discuss such a crucial matter with just anyone. As I pondered, suddenly a name sparked in my mind. Alfred. Yes, him. Why hadn't I thought of him sooner? He could help me, he knew the situation and was a lawyer specializing in these areas. I had to approach him. So, the next day, with much stress and embarrassment, I went to his law office. When I arrived at his office, his secretary, a young woman whom I had not seen before, stood up and greeted me with a smile. "Hello dear, how can I help you?" I said, "I need to see Mr. Smith, is he available?" She asked if I had an appointment. I said no, but asked if she could check with him and tell him that Charlotte had come. The secretary looked at me suspiciously, picked up the phone, and called Alfred, saying, "Alfred, there's a lady named Charlotte here to see you." She called him Alfred? They must have a relationship. Alfred's previous secretary never called him by his first name. And Alfred? He wouldn't have allowed his secretary to do that. My eyes went to the girl's ring finger. There was no ring, and I involuntarily breathed a sigh of relief. I couldn't hear Alfred's response, but it was clear he hesitated for a moment because the secretary again asked, "So, should I tell her to come in?" Then she hung up and told me, "You can go in, he's waiting for you." Thanking the secretary with a nod and under her suspicious gaze, I proceeded to Alfred's office. Upon entering, the first thing that caught my attention was Alfred's usual fragrance wafting through the air. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and was momentarily lost in our shared memories until his voice snapped me back to reality. "Hello, Charlotte." His face was filled with surprise, and it was evident he was shocked to see me. I said, "Hello, sorry if I'm intruding. I know you don't want to see me, but I need your help." He invited me to sit down on the sofa set aside for clients, and we sat across from each other. Both of us were awkward, and I didn't know how to start. He offered, "What would you like? Tea, coffee, or juice?" I declined, saying, "Nothing, thank you." Alfred said, "Don't talk like that. Whatever happened is in the past. You are now the daughter of my mother's close friend. What help do you need?" I began to tell him the whole story, and as I did, I could see anger forming on his face, perhaps remembering his folly in loving me. When I finished, he wrote some things on a piece of paper and asked for Arthur's phone number and everything I knew about him, including his address. I gave him the information, and he brought me a form to fill out and give him power of attorney. Before I started filling it out, I asked him if others would find out if we filed a complaint. He said, "No, not at all. Most people think staying silent is better to protect their reputation, but as long as they don't want it, their case remains confidential. Silence only emboldens the abusers." I filled out the form, signed it, and then asked him, "How much is your fee?" He smiled and said, "Don't be embarrassed. I don't take money from acquaintances. Don't mention it again." Alfred told me he would handle the complaint against Arthur and keep me updated. I gave him my new SIM card number and thanked him at the farewell. Alfred said he was glad I trusted him again and assured me he would get justice from that brute. I expressed my gratitude for not letting me down and hoped the girl sitting outside wasn't like me and knew his worth. I was curious about his relationship with his secretary, who addressed him by his first name. Alfred laughed, saying she was actually his friend's sister and like a sister to him. "If that satisfies your curiosity, take care," he said. I blushed, feeling embarrassed. Alfred always had a knack for catching people off guard. About a month after meeting with Alfred, he called and informed me that the court session was scheduled for the next day. He said to be ready as he would pick me up to go together. I was intensely stressed, fearing my mother would find out what I had done. Alfred picked me up at 10 in the morning, and we headed to the courthouse. Upon arrival, I saw 3 other girls present as plaintiffs. We all sat down when Arthur was brought and handcuffed. Seeing him, my entire body froze, and I turned pale. Then I felt the warmth of Alfred's hand on mine, and he quietly told me to stay calm. Just that one word was enough for me to gather my strength. The trial lasted for about an hour, and due to the high number of plaintiffs and evidence found in his blood, Arthur was arrested and sentenced to death for the crime of rape and abuse of girls' videos and photos, which was objectionable. Alfred assured me even if Arthur appealed, he wouldn't get away. Finally, the nightmare with Arthur was over. I felt like a bird freed from a cage, a feeling I owed to Alfred. It was he who had managed to find the girls Arthur had exploited with the help of Arthur's friend and convince them to file a complaint. I told Alfred, "I can't find the words to thank you for what you've done. I'm really grateful for getting justice for me and the other girls." Alfred replied, "I should have taken care of your rights last year when we were engaged. Forgive me, my jealousy and pride blinded me." Since that day, a friendly relationship formed between me and Alfred. Now, 7 months after the court case, Alfred and I decided to give our relationship another chance. I know it's hard for him, but Alfred has shown me what true manhood means, and finally, I too have touched happiness. This is just one part of the countless stories waiting for your viewing. If you'd like to continue this exciting journey with us, don't forget to follow our channel for more videos. Each story brings a new lesson, and every video is a fresh adventure. So, to continue with these adventures and hear more stories, be sure to follow our channel and enjoy our new videos. We look forward to seeing you in our next story.